'Tis I, your old pal, King Chuck. Remember, years ago, there used to be a couple of these shows with that name of Where Are They Now? There were these shows that, VH1 did a Where Are They Now show, and, I guess a few network shows talked about where certain celebrities were now, and basically these shows, it's like, you hear about these celebrities and, they once upon a time they're big and they're big celebrities and then all of a sudden you don't hear about them anymore. They've disappeared into oblivion. And the reality is, the reason why they don't do these Where Are They Now shows anymore, I think it's because all you have to do is Google somebody's name and there they are. They talk about, like for an example, if you're a fan of a certain artist, a musician, well, all you have to do is just go to, Google their name and you'll probably go to their website or Wikipedia article and they'll say, yeah, they're still recording and, they're probably playing at some state fair. Wherever. So, in the Howard Stern world, some people kind of wonder, whatever happened to Tim Sabian? Well, Tim is right now in a whole heap of trouble. So, Tim Sabian, of course, was the man who was responsible for Howard Stern's syndicated radio career. He was his story was that he worked at WYSP Philadelphia as the programming director back in the mid-'80s, and it was him who told management, this Howard Stern guy from New York, he wants to be, he could be a hit here in Philly. So, of course, when Howard moved to mornings on K-Rock, they put Howard's show on WYSP also. And, of course, Howard was very notorious for his attacks on John DeBella over at WMMR. He was the morning zoo guy over there. And the ratings went through the roof. The battle between DeBella and Stern, legendary. Howard and John were not the greatest of friends. And then Howard got into Los Angeles, Phoenix. He was on the air, and here in Michigan, he was on the air in Grand Rapids first on KLQ back in '96, and then about a year later, 97.1 Detroit picked him up. They renamed the station K-Rock over there. And, most of the markets Howard was in, he did pretty well. Although in Detroit, his show, was really, they were really getting the crap kicked out of them by Drew and Mike over at WRIF. Even Howard attacked Drew and Mike for being just unfunny Howard Stern wannabes. And I even remembered going to Detroit as a kid, listening to 97.1, and they were on full attack mode on the riff. They had somebody impersonating Arthur Penhallow, baby! Yeah. And, and the story was, they were do these bits where they talk about the many wives Arthur Penhallow had, and the fact that the riff sounded so old, and oh my God, those bits were funny. But the problem was, people loved the riff because, Howard Stern, he was on W4 106.7, back in the early 80s, and he tanked, unfortunately. Anyway, I can go on and on and on, but back to what we were talking about. So, Stern's run in Philadelphia obviously brought a lot of ratings in. Of course, Steven Singer Jewelers is definitely one of the big sponsors that Howard has. I mean, he helped to put, Steven Singer on the map at the corner of 8th and Walnut in Philadelphia. Well, he's got that other location now, too. Yeah. I'm kind of shocked he didn't make his store a chain. Oh, well. As long as he's making good money from Stern. Yeah. So, anyway, long story short, when Howard left the miserable, depressing world of terrestrial radio and moved over to satellite radio back in 2006, he announced that his stations on Sirius XM radio, well, actually it was just Sirius back then, his stations would now be programmed by Tim Sabian. And Tim was now programming 100 and 101. Of course, they were kind of instrumental in bringing Bubba the Love Sponge over to Sirius. Of course, the story was that Howard and Bubba were the most bitter of all enemies because Bubba was a bit of a redneck, and he one time his show aired in Connecticut, and they would the story was that there were these bits that Bubba was doing. He would go, "Howard Stern sucks," yeah, and that's all it was. And now Bubba and Howard were friends. Anyway, so the rest of the story was that Howard. So the rest of the story was that Howard. So he moved over to Sirius XM. Of course, Sirius and XM merged, and then what happened was Howard. So the story that I heard was that Tim Sabian was actually promoted at Sirius to run the entertainment channels, but somehow Sabian either was let go due to job cuts, or he just quit on his own accord. So the story was, a few years ago, the New York Post does this scathing article on Howard Stern. New York Post, of course, is owned by the Murdoch family. They own Fox Fake News. And the Murdochs have, this is a family that has made billions of dollars from tabloid journalism. That's what it is. Tabloid journalism. Let's expose the bad of the good. And they've attacked Howard Stern for decades. And now their latest hissy fit on the King of All Media was that Howard was basically throwing his former employees underneath the rug. And they showcased Scott Salem, the engineer. Scott Salem was fired. So the story was that Scott allegedly was fired because he did a GoFundMe page for his wife, who was dying of lung cancer and eventually died from it. It was a known fact that Scott and his wife were heavy smokers. And the sad truth was, Howard got mad at Scott because he felt that the world, now he was begging for charity. He was basically what was happening was that how it made it look like Howard was not paying his employees enough money. And, and of course, there were all these things going around about, like, for an example, Stuttering John made a claim that he was only getting paid $20,000 a year. And then he went over to NBC in Los Angeles, where he was the Tonight Show with Jay Leno announcer, and was now at $400,000. Of course, he doesn't have that sweet gig anymore. So now, anyway, Scott, so this is what happened. Allegedly, what happened was when Scott was fired from the Stern Show, Sirius XM kept him as an engineer, but now he was working downstairs, and every time Howard passed him, they didn't even speak. So they're basically making it look, so, and it wasn't just Scott, it was, they talked about people like Artie Lang. Of course, Artie got fired because of his, continuing drug problems. And, of course, Vice did this stupid documentary on him, and they claimed that the reason for his drug problems was because of, his work, Howard Stern was working him to death. And it's like, come on, man, And same with Jackie the Joke Man Martling. And it's like, come on, man, I mean, it's, they don't talk about the fact that there's a lot of folks who have worked for the Stern Show for an incredibly long time. People like Robin Quivers and Baba Booey and of course Fred Norris. Fred Norris has been there since the 70s, since he was, the two met in Hartford at WCCC. And of course, and the list goes on and on. Howard, any business will play favorites, okay? I mean, I'm thankful at my shop. I've been there, this will be my 24th year in business. And yes, early on, I was on the shit list a lot because of the guy who was managing my company at the time. But guess what happened? He was forced into retirement, and his boss took over, and now I was the good guy. They saw good in me. But that's the way it is sometimes. Howard, I mean, you got to realize your job, working for Howard Stern is to make him look good. And the fact that Scott the engineer fired him Scott the engineer got fired by Howard. Look, man, cigarettes kill. Okay? It was their decision to get lung cancer. And I know, Howard, I don't know, folks, I don't know how well the health insurance at Sirius XM is or with the Stern Show. Okay? That's not my business. But all I can say is I understand Howard Stern is worth $650 million, allegedly. And, they keep saying that, well, he signs these contracts for $500 million. And, he's only on for 3 more years, and, God only knows what's going to happen. He was only on once this week. Howard was only on once this week. So anyway, Tim Sabian, back to Tim. After all this was going on, he posts on Twitter that Howard Stern fired him personally because so the story was, according to Tim, his dad was dying of lung cancer. He wanted to, he announced to Howard that he was going to be spending some time with him. And what happened was Howard, instead of being understanding, he just simply fired him. Now, Tim wanted the world to look at Howard as evil to that respect. Because let's face it, Howard basically made it look like he wanted Tim Sabian to choose between family or career. But I cry bullshit on that. And I'll tell you why. So, many years ago, about 20 odd years ago, Tim and a fellow former employee of CBS Infinity named Bill Gleich started a company called Sovereign Communications. And Sovereign is one of the biggest media companies in the entire Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Now, here's the thing. Now, what happened was they purchased a bunch of stations in the UP, in Marquette, and Sault Ste. Marie. Bill is originally from the Sioux. He started in radio when he was 14 years old. As a matter of fact, I met Bill many years ago at the St. Ignace Auto Show. And at the time, they were promoting their oldie station, Oldies 93.9 of Newberry, which had gone up to a full 100,000 watts. So the story was, I met Bill and many of the staffers at Sovereign, and they were really nice people. But here's what happened. One of the guys who was there was a DJ at Oldies 93.9, and I guess he was the show, programmer at the station. I don't know if he's still there or not. And I told him, because I live in Grand Rapids, I mostly listen to Sirius. And he pretended to punch me in the nose because of that. And I'm like, you understand that one of your bosses is the showrunner at Sirius, right? I did not know at the time that Tim Sabian was one of the owners of Sovereign. But Bill Gleich, who goes by the name of Bill Curtis, he's the showrunner, allegedly. Now, Bill Curtis is, number one, it's a bit of a dumb name to go by because there's already a Bill Curtis in the world of broadcasting, the legendary newsman from Chicago, who is known for his work for CBS and PBS. And then, on top of that, so anyway, the reason why the shit's hitting the fan for Sovereign Communications and Tim Sabian. So here's the story. So anyway, I stopped going to the Saying This Out show, because of money issues that I was having at the time. I used to go up every year because it was a tradition for my father and I. And maybe this year, I don't know. So anyway, here's the story. Sovereign Communications made headlines in the UP a few years ago because they built a new studio in Sault Ste. Marie, and then the company ran out of money to pay, for the building. And it ended up in the hands of the local, I guess it ended up in the bank. The bank took it over, and then it was sold on the courthouse steps. So I don't know if they're broadcasting from that same studio or not. As a matter of fact, I went to one of the radio station's websites, and they don't necessarily give out an address for the actual studio. You go to, and the address, it's like if you want to send them a personal letter, it's a P.O. box, unfortunately. And so so what happened is I looked on Google Street View, and they don't even have a sign on the building. And I'm thinking to myself, that's kind of shady when a radio station or any business does not have a sign on their building advertising what business it is. I don't know. But then, shortly thereafter, Bill Gleich got himself into a lot of trouble. So, word has it that Bill has a problem with had a problem with alcoholism. And a few years ago, he was arrested for drunk driving, and it was his third offense. So the judge threw the book at him, and he ended up in prison for like 3/4 of the year. So, yeah. And so they ended up having to sell their Marquette stations to another company called Armada Media. So anyway, so the rest of the story is that, so I don't know if Bill's out. I'm pretty much sure he's out of jail now. I don't know how much. I think he's still the part owner, and I don't know how much of an active role he has. So anyway, so now Sovereign is in trouble again. So Sovereign, and I'll tell you some of the stations they own in Sault Ste. Marie. They own Rock 101.3. They own Country 105. They own Oldies 93.9. Now, they do have at least a couple of stations with original sounding names, just not the, Like one station they have is called Yes 99.5, which is Sault Ste. Marie's legendary top 40 station. They've been around for 40 years or so. But here's something funny. They own WKNW 1400 AM, which is a right-wing asshole batshit crazy talk station. So, and it used in KNW, the KNW portion, what originally was called No 1400. So, yeah, when I was a kid, I thought I saw a commercial that had the No 1400 logo, and it was a picture of an owl dressed like a professor holding a stick. So they own Yes and No. Okay? And Radio Sioux, WSOO, 1230 AM. So they own a couple of stations here and there. And, here's the thing. They own the Sioux. They own most of the American stations on the U.S. side of Sault Ste. Marie. And so that basically means they have a near monopoly. But, of course, they are competing against Canadian stations like 104.3 The Fox, which is a rock station. So now there's two rock stations serving the Sioux area, along with Rock 101.3. Both are mainstream rock and roll stations. And I guess there's another top 40 station, 100.5 FM. That's a Canadian station, technically. So yeah, both stations have to play Canadian music, too. So you're going to hear, on the rock station, you're going to hear, Rush and the Tragically Hip, and, to make the government, Canadian government a little bit happier. So anyway, the rest of the story is that, it's like there's that part of me that says they should have a license to print money. Well, now they're in trouble with the FCC. So allegedly what happened was the FCC is now saying that Sovereign owes them like $32,000 because of, they renewed their licenses and they didn't pay them up front. So now they have to, send the FCC the money or send them a letter saying, we're broke. So, I'm starting to think here, things are a little bit shady over at Sovereign. And of course, a lot of it is, of course, on Tim Sabian. Mr. Howard fired me because my daddy was dying. And I'm like, dude, the reality is that I've said it once and I'll say it again. Howard Stern is a business, okay? And I know Howard has fired people over the years because of stupid shit. And people love to blame Howard for everything that goes wrong in society. When in fact, yes, he's tried to clean up his image a little bit so he can get more first-rate guests on the show, even though today he had Bunny XO, who is Jelly Roll's wife, on the show. She was a former sex worker, former adult entertainer, and now she's making money from the fact that she's married to a millionaire country rock star. And the point is, folks, is that one of the lessons I've learned about life is that you don't fucking say shit about Howard. Because, you don't fuck around. When you fuck around with Howard Stern, you're going to fuck around and find out. When I was a kid growing up in northern Michigan, I wanted Howard's radio show on the air. And on KLT, I thought was the best pick. But there was a problem. The assholes who owned KLT were a family from North Dakota. They did not care about the overall quality of the station. They only cared about money. So this is what they did. They hired this. Many years ago, they hired a new morning show guy from St. Louis named Jim Ellis. Jim Ellis was an asshole. He put on a lot of really bad comedy bits. He wasn't funny. I heard some of the jokes that he said back in the day, and it's like, the dude it's like he made fun of the death of John Denver. Yeah, he actually said on the air something to the tune of, "Oh, he died of a Rocky Mountain high." And his sidekick, Pete Misiak, even said, "I wish I never worked with you." And it was true. They didn't get along. So what happened was, Jim took a shot at Howard Stern. So the story was, Northern Express, the little indie paper in Traverse City, they interviewed him, and he said, when asked about Howard Stern, he was like, "Well, Howard, they're paying him $1 million a year in Detroit, and the gospel station's killing him." Well, guess what? KLT fired him. He claimed they fired him because they wanted somebody cheaper to do the morning show. Which makes sense because Jim's ratings, I guess, were not even there either. And then on top of that, they rehired him a few years later because, KLT was kind of in a dead zone, getting their asses kicked around by the bear. And, the zone was, no pun intended, they were starting to play some real rock for once and both stations were killing KLT in the ratings. So they rehired Jim Ellis. But Jim got fired because allegedly he said some really bad jokes on the air and did some impersonations of Asian people. And people complained. So anyway, not long after Jim got fired, he dies. He actually died of a heart attack, 48 years old. And it's like the dude was always carrying around, and it's like, yeah, I saw pictures of him holding cigars, and he was big and fat. Yeah, 48 years old was a good age for somebody like him. And it goes on and on, folks. I've seen radio stations not recover after dumping Howard. KLQ here in Grand Rapids was an example, and Hanlon, of course, became a has-been in this area. I've seen, people who have Bubba the Love Sponge dissed Howard Stern, and Howard forgave him because they knew they were all in this together because of what the FCC was doing. And of course, what's even sad is you look at the FCC now and what they're doing now to late night TV. Of course, we all heard today that the Late Show, Stephen Colbert was supposed to air an interview with a Texas congressman, and CBS pulled the interview because they were afraid that the FCC was going to go after them. And I'm like, something, man? I am tired of the Trump regime, and even worse was the fact that, and as a matter of fact, even on his Twitter profile, Sabian claims that, he is a Trumper. He is MAGA. Which is no wonder why he owns a right-wing conservative talk station in the Sioux. Now, betcha it doesn't even make money. But who knows? You see, folks, I think, the fact that Tim was playing with both satellite radio and terrestrial radio might have been, it was like he had to choose one or the other. And I'm guessing he decided, okay, I'm going to go with terrestrial radio. And look at it now. The only fucking American operators in the Sioux, and they're broke. Why? And I understand the Sioux, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is broke as fuck. The only industry they got is tourism, quite frankly. And I wouldn't even want to live up there. It's so boring. There's nothing to do. True story. My grandma, my great grandmother on my mom's side lived near Escanaba. And they shut down the town schools about 40 odd years ago. Why? It was because many of the kids in that area had to, get this, many of the kids were sent away to special ed because of inbreeding. There's nothing to do up there except fuck your brothers and sisters and cousins. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of areas in the UP you can hear the banjos going. And when you're dealing with an area with that's economically repressed, that's what you're going to get, folks. That's what you're going to get. And Tim Sabian is paying the price. And there's another question. Who would want his stations in the UP if they're running out of money? I don't know. That's up to him and Bill. They got themselves into trouble because of Bill's drinking and, the fact that they were forced to, sell some of their stations, and, their building was stuck on, sold on the courthouse steps. It says a lot about your company, folks. And I know radio is a dying business, and it's been dying for years because they stopped caring about what people wanted. It's all about the investors. It's all about the shareholders. It's about the owners. And, they didn't really care about me when I was a kid growing up in the 90s. And I bitch about it a lot. I mean, people have taken to social media and they bitch about why KLT sucks, even though, they're, the ratings say otherwise. They got a 12 share. So this is my take, folks. Tim Sabian is learning how to eat crow and boy, is it going to taste really good for him. And all I can say is, we'll probably get to know more in the near future about why he's in trouble with the FCC and Sovereign Communications. I mean, come on. You got to do what you got to do. Okay? Okay, that's enough of my ramblings for right now. I got to get home. So, see me later. I'll talk to you later. Good day and good luck, everybody.